They examined her ID closely, questioned her credentials, and even called security, only to realize they were about to refuse service to the very person capable of ending their careers instantly. This thought had lingered quietly in Danielle Grayson's mind for months. At first, it was easy to dismiss, but with time it gnawed at her. Danielle had built Grayson Trust from scratch. Her bank, her legacy. She wasn't just a CEO in a glass office overlooking the skyline. She had dedicated years to making sure her institution stood apart, accessible and rooted in fairness. But was it truly fair? That question haunted her nights. She'd heard whispers before, concerns about how some customers were treated at certain branches. Nothing overt, nothing that would cause a scandal, just subtle stories from friends, passing remarks from trusted sources. Initially, she brushed it off. After all, her bank had strict policies on fairness, anti-discrimination, and exceptional customer service. Yet policies were mere words on paper. Real change required action. Danielle needed evidence, not as a CEO or a boss, but as a customer herself. So today, she was just another woman walking into a bank. No pricey blazer, no silk blouse, no designer heels, only a simple cardigan, jeans, and sneakers. She parked at a Grayson Trust branch in Indianapolis, Indiana. Location she personally approved 3 years ago. She had shaken hands with the branch manager at the ribbon, cutting, posed for photos, and delivered a speech about trust being the cornerstone of good banking. Now she entered as an anonymous customer. The automatic doors slid open, and the sharp scent of freshly printed paper mixed with industrial strength air freshener filled the lobby. She looked around, a slow afternoon, a few people standing in line, a couple seated in the waiting area, and a teller at the far end balancing a cash drawer. Danielle adjusted her bag and approached the counter. A young teller, perhaps in her mid-20s, pale, skinned with dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, glanced up briefly. No greeting, no smile, just a quick one, sober before returning to her screen. Clearing her throat, Danielle said, "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal." The teller didn't look up again, but slid a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out." The form was standard: name, account number, withdrawal amount. Nothing unusual. Danielle grabbed a pen and wrote $5,000, not a massive sum, but enough to require ID verification. Sliding the clipboard back, the shift happened. The teller's eyes flicked from the form to Danielle's ID. Her brows knitted, lips tightening into a thin line. There was a subtle change, a tension in the air, a hesitation absent moments before. Danielle gave her the benefit of the doubt. The teller looked up again, truly meeting Danielle's eyes this time, then hesitated, a beat too long. In that split second, Danielle realized it wasn't about the withdrawal, bank policy, or security. It was about who they thought she was. The teller's fingers hovered above the keyboard, then as if making a decision, she slowly set Danielle's ID on the counter. I'll be right back." Danielle's eyes narrowed as the teller grabbed the ID and disappeared behind a door leading to the manager's office. Exhaling slowly, Danielle tapped her nails against the marble countertop. She had expected differential treatment, but not this. Something told her it was only the beginning, yet she wasn't leaving, at least not without answers. Leaning on the counter, she watched the teller vanish behind frosted glass. The lobby's atmosphere thickened, as if an unspoken tension lingered. Her gaze drifted. A man in business attire stood 2 spots behind her, waiting. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened, looking like he'd just come from work. When he approached, the teller greeted him immediately. No hesitation. An older woman in a floral dress chatted comfortably with another teller across the lobby. No extra scrutiny, no delay. Danielle turned back to the counter, jaw tightening. She had been standing there nearly 5 minutes, waiting for an explanation, for something that should never be happening. But deep down, She already understood what was unfolding. This wasn't merely a matter of policy. If it had been, the teller would have explained what was wrong. She wouldn't have walked away without saying a word. This felt different. Finally, the door swung open, and the teller returned, this time accompanied by someone else, a branch manager. He was middle-aged, stocky, bald, wearing rimless glasses. His name tag read Todd Larson. His expression was polite but too measured. He didn't approach with the easy demeanor of someone simply wanting to help. Instead, he was evaluating her. Danielle recognized that look. She'd seen it before, just never aimed at her. Todd stopped at the counter, giving her a tight-lipped smile. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal." Danielle nodded once. "That's right. $50,000, my account, my ID." Todd glanced at the teller, then back at Danielle. "Mind if I take a quick look at your identification?" She exhaled slowly, keeping her tone steady. "I already gave it to her." Todd didn't respond to that remark. He picked up the ID, holding it up to the light, scrutinizing it. Then he looked back at her. "Miss Grayson, is this your first time banking with us?" Danielle's stomach sank. The question was carefully phrased, but the implication was clear. "Do you belong here?" Her tone sharpened. "I've banked here since this branch opened." Todd gave a slow, exaggerated nod as if he was digesting the information. "And you said you're withdrawing $50,000. Danielle felt her patience wearing thin. "That's what I wrote down." The lobby grew quieter, not silent, but noticeably hushed. A few customers glanced her way, likely sensing the tension. Todd flipped the ID over in his fingers and, without meeting her eyes, asked, "And what do you do for work, Miss Grayson?" Danielle let out a short laugh, more disbelief than amusement. That was the moment professionalism slipped, revealing the truth beneath. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I'm in finance," she said cautiously. Todd's smile was forced. "Oh, what kind?" Danielle let the silence stretch before answering, "Banking." That gave him a brief pause, but instead of retreating, he pressed on. "I see. And this is a personal account, correct? Not a business one." She crossed her arms. "That's what it says on the form." Another slow nod, another glance at the teller, more hesitation. Then, as if reaching some invisible verdict, Todd placed the ID back on the counter. "Unfortunately, we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time." Danielle blinked, absorbing the words. She straightened. "Excuse me." Todd maintained a calm, measured expression. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean? You have my ID, my account number. What's left to verify?" Todd clasped his hands together. "It's just a precaution. We take security very seriously." There it was, security, the word people used when they wouldn't say what they truly meant. Danielle's fingers curled against her palms. This wasn't about fraud or banking policy. It was about something else entirely, but she wasn't leaving. Not without answers. Todd wasn't finished. He had one more thing to say. Danielle braced herself. She knew things were about to get worse. She let the words hang in the air. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Her gaze flicked between Todd and the teller, silently urging them to fix this, to realize their mistake, to process her withdrawal, and let her leave quietly. But neither moved. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the counter. "Todd," she said, calm but firm, "what exactly needs to be verified?" Todd kept his hands folded in front of him, his expression neutral, too neutral. "Well, Miss Grayson, large cash withdrawals require additional security steps. We just need to confirm a few details before proceeding." Danielle arched a brow, silently asking, "What?" Todd hesitated just a moment before replying. "Just some basic account verification." "Can you tell me the amount of the last deposit made to this account?" Danielle stared at him. That wasn't standard procedure. Security questions were normal, but that wasn't one of them, not for a withdrawal with valid ID. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down, an unspoken challenge, a test to prove she had rightful access to her own money. Her fingers curled against the marble countertop. "I don't have that number memorized," she said evenly, "but if you pull up my account like you would for anyone else, you can see all my deposits." Todd gave her a thin smile. "Of course, but in the interest of security, they need to verify that the account holder can confirm certain details first." Danielle's jaw tightened. "I just handed you my ID." Todd remained unfazed. "I understand, but you'd be surprised how often fake IDs make it through." She took a slow breath through her nose. "I'm not withdrawing millions, just $5,000, a small fraction of what's in this account. I've followed protocol already, so tell me again, what's the real problem here?" Todd's expression didn't waver. "We're just doing our due diligence, Miss Grayson." Her patience was running thin. "Todd," she said steadily, "if I were a man in a tailored suit, would you be asking me these questions?" The words hit. A flicker of something crossed his face, too quick to catch, but it was there, a shift in posture, a subtle tightening around his eyes. Just as fast, his mask of professionalism returned. "This isn't about appearances," he said smoothly. "It's about policy." Danielle let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that so?" Todd tilted his head, considering his next words. "Would you like to try a different form of verification? Perhaps a utility bill? A second form of ID?" "A utility bill?" Danielle exhaled in disbelief. "You want me to provide a second ID for my own bank account? The one where you're currently holding my money?" Todd didn't flinch. Danielle shook her head, tapping her nails against the counter. "Okay, let's do it a different way. Pull up my account." Todd hesitated. "You have my name," she continued. "You have my ID. If you check my file, you'll see I've banked here since day one. I helped open this branch. I probably signed off on some of your training materials." Todd stayed silent, leaning in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make her point. Danielle said, "You might want to check before you dig this hole any deeper." Todd pressed his lips together. The teller, who had been quietly watching, shifted uncomfortably. Danielle wondered if he'd finally cave, apologize, and handle this properly from the start. Instead, Todd let out a short breath, as if reluctantly deciding, "I'm sorry, Miss Grayson. Without additional verification, we cannot process this withdrawal today." A flush of heat rose in Danielle's chest, not embarrassment, but anger. She could feel near-by customers' eyes flick toward the exchange, sensing tension but pretending not to notice. She heard the measured politeness in Todd's voice, the kind that said security wasn't the real concern. He'd already decided she didn't belong here, and nothing she said would change that. But Todd made a crucial mistake. If he had just processed the transaction, it would have ended there. Now Danielle was about to make him regret it. Before she could respond, Todd did something that sent a fresh wave of disbelief through her, turning frustration into outright fury. Danielle barely had time to react before Todd pressed a discreet button beneath the counter near the register and called security. A uniformed guard with broad shoulders, hand near his belt, emerged from a back office. His expression was unreadable, but Danielle knew exactly what this meant. A bank manager refusing service was one thing, calling security was something else. It was a statement, an escalation, and it tightened her stomach. She let out a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She'd dealt with men like Todd before, those who didn't expect pushback, those determined to remind certain people where they stood. But she wouldn't play into it. Lifting her chin, she locked eyes with Todd. "You're really doing this?" Todd wore a carefully neutral expression. "We just want to ensure a smooth experience for all our customers." A smooth experience. As if she was the one causing trouble. The security guard stepped closer, his voice measured. "Is there a problem here?" Danielle turned to him, keeping her posture relaxed. "That depends. she said coolly. "Are you here to help me access my money or just to escort me out?" The guard hesitated, glancing at Todd, who gave a tight nod. Danielle let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Wow, so this is how it's going to be." Todd sighed as if he were the one inconvenienced. "Miss Grayson, if you bring additional documents, we'd be glad to help you, but right now we cannot," Todd interrupted. Danielle cut him off sharply. "You know what's ironic, Todd? I just watched you process that man's transaction 10 minutes ago. No extra checks, no manager involved, no security called." Todd's face stiffened. She leaned closer to the counter, lowering her voice. "I wonder what makes me so different." The atmosphere shifted noticeably. The teller glanced down, avoiding eye contact. The security guard adjusted his stance, less rigid now. Todd, however, stayed firm. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Grayson," he said flatly, "but our policies exist for a reason." Danielle held his gaze for a long moment before slowly reaching into her bag. Todd tensed, the security guard's hand inching toward his belt. Unfazed, Danielle pulled out her phone and began recording. A few customers looked over, sensing something was about to unfold. Todd's posture shifted uneasily. "Miss Grayson, I just want to get this on record," she said smoothly. "You are denying me access to my own account, despite having government-issued ID, while other customers aren't required to provide any extra verification." Todd's jaw tightened. Danielle shifted the phone, angling the camera toward the security guard. "And what exactly was the reason for calling you over?" The guard hesitated, glancing at Todd. Danielle held her ground, not blinking, not looking away, refusing to let them control the moment. A heavy silence filled the room. Then Todd made a final error. He reached out, not to push her or grab the phone, but to snatch her ID off the counter, as if he still had the final say. That was the moment Danielle smiled, because Todd had no idea who he was dealing with, and in about 10 seconds, he'd regret handling things this way. She let the pause stretch, letting him feel the full weight of his mistake. He had taken her ID as though he owned the bank, but it wasn't his. It was hers. She tilted her phone to ensure the camera caught his face, the security guard, the tense atmosphere. Then, in the calmest voice possible, she said, "Todd, let me properly introduce myself." His expression twitched, the first sign of real doubt. Deliberately, Danielle retrieved her ID from his grip, flipping it over and tapping her finger on the printed name. "You see this? This isn't just any customer's ID." She paused, letting the meaning settle. "You're looking at the founder and CEO of Grayson Trust." The silence in the lobby was immediate. The security guard's posture shifted. The teller's face drained of color. Even the nearby customers, pretending not to listen, stiffened. For the first time since this started, Todd lost control. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Danielle stepped back slowly, slipping her ID into her bag. "I built this bank," she said, "from nothing. I signed off on this branch. I personally approved the budget that hired you." Todd's hands clenched into fists. His entire demeanor changed. Gone was the forced politeness. Now there was pure panic. Danielle gave him a tight-lipped smile. "And today, I walked in as just another customer, to see what would happen." She tilted her head slightly. "You know what happened, Todd." He said nothing. Danielle lowered her voice just a bit. "I was refused service, lied to, humiliated, treated like I didn't belong." Todd blinked, mouth opening. "Miss Grayson," she raised a hand, stopping him. "No, you had your chance to speak. Now you listen." Turning so everyone in the lobby could hear, she said, "If I were standing here in a tailored suit, if I were a man, if I looked like what you expect a CEO to look like, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation." Todd's eyes flicked to the security guard, searching for support. The guard said nothing. The teller stared down at her register, as if wanting to vanish. Danielle took a slow breath and raised her phone again. "Todd, I have a question for you. Would you like me to send this video directly to corporate, or should I just handle this right here? Todd visibly paled, opening and closing his mouth twice before finally speaking. Miss Grayson, I sincerely apologize. This was just a misunderstanding. Danielle arched a brow. A misunderstanding, he quickly nodded. Yes, absolutely, I can process that withdrawal right away. Danielle let those words hang in the air for a moment. Then she softly laughed, shaking her head. Todd, she said, you and I both know it's far too late for that. Todd's face drained of color because he realized she was right. What happened next was entirely in her hands, but one thing was certain, his day was about to get much worse. Todd's confidence had completely vanished. The smooth, polished manager who had so casually dismissed her just minutes ago now stood stiff, gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The security guard, called earlier to manage the situation, shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between Todd and Danielle as if silently asking, "Am I still needed here?" Danielle exhaled slowly, tapping her nails against the counter. "Let me make sure I understand," she said calmly. "Just minutes ago, my ID wasn't enough, my name wasn't enough, my account history wasn't enough. You demanded more proof, extra verification, and now that you know exactly who I am." She paused, watching him squirm. All of that suddenly doesn't matter. Todd swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Miss Grayson, I sincerely regret how this situation unfolded. I assure you it was not intentional." Danielle let out a humorless laugh. "Not intentional," she repeated sharply. "Do you think I'm stupid?" His eyes widened, but he said nothing. "You knew exactly what you were doing," she continued, her voice calm but cutting. "You looked at me and already decided I didn't belong here. You threw up every obstacle to make sure I knew it." Todd shook his head quickly. "Miss Grayson, I assure you that's not what happened." Danielle raised a hand, cutting him off. "No," she said, her voice steely. "I don't want to hear any more rehearsed apologies. Let's be clear. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." Todd's jaw clenched. The customers around the lobby stopped pretending not to listen. The atmosphere crackled with tension as the weight of the moment settled on everyone nearby. The teller who'd started this whole ordeal stood frozen, eyes fixed on the register, refusing to meet Danielle's gaze. Danielle turned to the security guard. "You were called to escort me out, correct?" she asked. The guard hesitated before nodding slowly. "Yes, ma'am, that was my understanding." She nodded. "Now that you know who I am, do you still hold that view?" The guard glanced at Todd, then back at her, shifting his stance slightly. "No, ma'am. I was just following orders." Danielle studied him for a moment. She understood how this played out. Todd would try to shift blame, call it an overreaction, try to sweep it under the rug. But this was not going away. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, sliding the card across the counter to Todd. "You will call my office, arrange a meeting with corporate, and explain in detail why this occurred today." Todd's fingers trembled slightly as he took the card. "Of course, Miss Grayson. Absolutely." Danielle then addressed the security guard. "I appreciate your stepping in when called," she said evenly, "but I suggest you be more discerning about when your involvement is truly necessary. If a customer isn't disruptive, intimidation should never be the first step." The guard gave a small nod. "Understood, ma'am." She then turned toward the teller, who still acted as if she didn't exist. "You," Danielle said, voice calm but firm. The young woman flinched. Danielle leaned slightly over the counter. "You saw my ID, you had my account details, and you still decided I wasn't worth listening to." The teller finally looked up, eyes wide. "I was just following protocol, ma'am." Danielle swallowed hard. "Then maybe you need to ask yourself why protocol only seems to apply to people like me." The teller looked away. Danielle took one last sweeping glance around the branch. Every customer was watching, every employee listening. This was no longer about a withdrawal. This was about something much larger. Straightening her shoulders, Danielle had made her point. but she wasn't finished. She was going to make sure this never happened again. Her heels clicked purposefully against the polished tile as she walked toward the exit. The silence in the bank was thick, nearly suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. Todd stood frozen, the business card still clutched tightly in his hand. The teller looked as if she wished the floor would swallow her whole. The security guard, who had been so ready to escort Danielle out, now appeared uneasy and uncertain. Meanwhile, the customers stopped pretending not to watch the unfolding scene. Danielle paused at the door, then slowly turned back for one final statement. She wasn't someone to let such an incident slide. Having spent years building this bank, it was meant to be a place where people felt safe, respected, and valued. But today's experience reminded her that policies written on paper meant nothing if the people enforcing them didn't believe in them. She took a slow breath, scanning the room. Then, with a steady, clear voice that could not be ignored, she declared, "This is the last time something like this happens in my bank." Her words hung heavily in the air. Todd flinched, the teller shifted uncomfortably, and the security guard looked down. Danielle pressed on. "I will not tolerate customers being treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or plain ignorance." Her tone remained calm but resolute. No need to raise her voice. Everyone was listening. "There will be real changes," she said simply, "because if this can happen to me, the CEO, I can only imagine what happens to those without the power to fight back." The bank stayed silent. Todd swallowed hard, his throat moving nervously. "Miss Grayson, I assure you, don't assure me," she interrupted coolly. "Show me." His mouth snapped shut. Danielle glanced at her phone. The recording was still running. She stopped it and slipped the device back into her bag. "Corporate will be in touch," she said. Then, turning to Todd, she added, "You might want to start looking for a new job." Without waiting for a reply, she walked out the door. The aftermath was swift. By the next morning, Danielle had called an emergency meeting with her corporate leadership team. Every branch manager was summoned, and all customer service policies underwent review. Todd was gone. But Danielle didn't stop there. She launched mandatory bias training at all branches, introduced a new system for accountability, and encouraged customers to report any form of discrimination, no matter how subtle. Within weeks, grace and trust began to change. Employees became more aware, and customers, especially those previously ignored or dismissed, noticed the difference. For Danielle, that day in the bank was unforgettable. It proved something she had always believed: real change doesn't come from words on paper. It happens when someone refuses to accept the status quo, and that someone was her. If you've ever experienced something similar, or know someone who has, don't stay silent. Speak up, call it out, and most importantly, demand change. Because the only way things get better is when we refuse to settle for less.